Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. I appreciate your attendance. If you weren't here for the last hour and a half, you missed an amazing presentation by InQtel. I'm going to blame you for missing that, but I'm going to give you credit for showing up for this one. So welcome to our Don IT West. We colloquially call it the Space Track or Space Trek to the next day and a half. I was talking to Mr. Bill June. We were creating this track about 3 or 4 months ago. I said, you know, it'd be great if we got the perspective. If you ever want to talk space, you should probably understand what the actual Space Force is doing in space, so that you, as a service who depends upon the Space Force, can align to what they're delivering. So I reached out to my friend Colonel Eric Felt, who's done a great job in the past of talking about the high-level plans of Space Force, especially from the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisition Integration. Just call it SAF-SQ when you're in the Pentagon, where I work. Of course, Eric came back to me a month or two ago and says, hey, I would love to be to San Diego, but I'm retiring. So he did a great job of turning over the brief to Lieutenant Colonel Matt Linus, who's going to come up here and give you his presentation today. So please ask questions as he briefs. And I should apologize, I forgot to tell you, I'm Captain Andy Gibbons. I am the Senior Military Acquisition Advisor to Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. I advise him, Dr. Brett Seidel, on the programmatic, strategic, and technical aspects of essentially data transport anywhere across the globe securely, and a lot of that focus is on space. So I split my time actually between ASN RDA and also Don CIO, and that's why we're part of this track today. But without further ado, really looking forward to Lieutenant Colonel Matt Linus stepping up and giving this brief today. So give him a quick welcome as he steps up.
All right, good morning. Really excited to be here. First rule of Space Force is go fast, catch me if you can, but that means the second rule is everything lacks polish, so I apologize. It'll be the first time I did this brief since I wrote all the words last night. All right. Hello again, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Matt Linus, and I'm here to talk a little bit about space acquisitions under the Secretary of the Air Force. Leading SAF-SQ right now today is Major General Purdy, the military deputy and the acting service acquisition executive, as Honorable Cavelli departed last week, and we await the new administration's pick for the SAE role. My reason to be here today representing General Purdy is twofold. First, I hope to deliver this mildly interesting organizational brief in such a way that some of you will be left curious enough to ask questions or reach out later and talk about the tough business of inter-service capability integration. Second, speaking for myself, I have long held the view that the Navy is by far the largest consumer of space services among the military, and that if I wanted to find friends to nerd out with, being an electrical engineer and a career acquisition officer, and discuss ever more creative ways to deter our adversaries, then, well, I'm here at the right place. 2 title slides. Okay. For this brief, I'll walk through the space acquisition broad roles, the policy pieces that Honorable Cavelli put in place to speed up space acquisitions, and to peek a little bit deeper into what SQ might be able to help you with in your programs and efforts. There should be plenty of time for questions at the end. SAF-SQ is responsible for all space systems acquisitions under Department of Air Force. It holds significant oversight functions over the various space program offices, the PEOs, and is led by the SE, which is a civilian political appointee. SAF-SQ is physically part of the Department of Air Force Secretariat staff, and therefore in support of the SecAF. So we all sit at the Pentagon. If you happen to be visiting the Pentagon and want to talk about space, please let us know. We love guests. We love talking about space. It is literally our favorite thing to do. And the pleasure will definitely be all ours. But our day-to-day usually consists with working with the field. Predominantly, that's Los Angeles Space Force Base in El Segundo. That's Space Systems Command. But also of note are the Space Rapid Capability Office in New Mexico and the Space Development Agency, who I think speaks later today in the capital region. Those three elements are predominantly responsible to actually build the space systems that deliver the capabilities we enjoy. When Honorable Covelli took the SAE role, Space Force was barely 2 years old as a service. Our entire acquisitions enterprise was still based on legacy ways of doing business. Our standard space program would deliver an exquisite capability with a bespoke system and integrate it to virtually nothing. True story. You laugh. An average 20-year delivery time from first contracts. So crassly stated, we are always over budget, over schedule, and arguably over engineered. So how to speed up and deliver space capabilities that will be successful against modern threats? So first were the 9 tenets. I'll go through these fairly summarily, but build smaller satellites. And this has in a large part been realized by the proliferation into low Earth orbit. Larger constellations are finally leveraging economy of scale through the space industry. Second is to avoid special access programs and overclassification, so we can actually talk to and share with others. And I'm specifically talking about with commercial partners and international partners. Deliver the ground segment operationally before launching the space segment. Historically, we got very, very good at launching satellites, but we lag heavily on infrastructure and equipment needed to utilize them fully from the ground. And the other 6 all summarize basically into we need to significantly improve our program management and use of contracts. Absolutely.
Sorry about it. Off or ask questions. My apologies for the delay. So, as having been for almost 5 years, 10 years, the program manager that was building the terminals to access space,
Right.
I viewed it as extremely significant that the Honorable Covelli laid these tenets out for everyone to see. Because for me, from a space perspective, this led the way, or is leading the way, as we try to, leverage Space Force to provide all our capabilities. And again, from my experience, having been in 170, and I don't want the Admiral to yell at me right here, but I'm going to say this openly, she just stepped in. But even in the Navy, when we owned the satellite, like MUOS, and we put that satellite up, 10, 15 years later, I'm still struggling to put a terminal on a ship for the first time to use MUOS. So I'm very sensitive to criticizing the Space Force when we even had a hard time when we owned the ground station, we owned the satellite, and we owned the terminal. So when Mr. Honorable Covelli put these out, I just want to hope, again, I'm anticipating the generals lining up with this as well. I want to give them a lot of kudos for laying this flat. Even for a guy like me, this was simple to follow. So thanks, Colonel. Sorry for messing up your flow.
Oh, no problem. That's why I wrote it down. As a tech guy, I will lose my train of thought immediately. I love rabbit holes. All right, second that was published was the Go Fast formula. Yeah, we can look at it. Very straightforward. This is still fairly controversial today, basically because of that last number, that +4, right? Use only fixed price contracts, firm fixed price contracts. To my knowledge, only Space Development Agency has fully implemented this formula to any level of actual success. The greater acquisition community is still struggling. But to go fast, the acquisition strategy and the contracting structure must enable you as a program manager to go fast. And that's what this is getting at. And for the last one, the third part, I won't dwell on this too much, but we have to train our people to not just be skilled professionals in every needed area for acquisitions, but also proficient at enabling and accepting fast-paced space acquisitions. So those 3 puzzle pieces come together and inform our keys to a success. Speed. A sense of urgency needs to drive our acquisitions. We need to deliver capabilities faster to maintain the technical advantages that space enables. Resiliency. Design our overarching architecture to be more resilient so that our warfighters can count on the services they need from space in crisis and conflict. Integration. We must understand how we will use all of our tools in time of conflict. Space is needed for all of these activities as we integrate our space architecture with traditional warfighting domains, providing the joint force with its strategic edge. But to do this, we need to deliver new capabilities on schedule and within budget. We need to design our space architecture to add resiliency and determine what programs are needed next to meet our strategic goals. Which gets to the best part, an org chart. But a good org chart, right? This is where I live. At the top, we have the SAE and the MILDEP. Both of these people are currently General Purdy as we wait for the next SAE appointment. Also to the right, oh, wrong box, but to the right, upper right, that's the Space Acquisition Council. This is our decision body for all major acquisition decisions. This ties, it's really hard to see, but this ties in representation from Secretary of Air Force, Chief Space Officer, Space Com, the NRO, and the SecDef. So all the big players are there. In the green box, the three-letter organizations, those are the staff, various staff functions within SQ, and I'll go into those a little bit next. And then at the very bottom, you've got all the different space program offices, most of which, the second till bottom line, the SAE has direct supervisory authority over, can tell them what to do. But some, the ones on the bottom, we only have oversight and understanding of, because these are still owned by Secretary of the Air Force and not Space Force. All right, the additional staff functions. So SQS is the Capability Delivery Directorate. They are responsible for existing programs, capabilities with systems already delivered and need in care, feeding, maintenance, training, etc. Or they're working on programs that are the next direct replacement for a legacy system. So if there's going to be another MUOS, someone in SQS is tracking. Whatever line number for GPS 3F, I think you were on, there's someone at SQS tracking that. SQT, probably more in line with what we're doing here, but that's the Technology Directorate. But they have a specific lens. So they monitor programmed technology development activities, something that's got to be on the books. And they have a specific focus for escorting technology programs that are nearing the early acquisition milestones so that they're about to be ready to be picked up by a larger program and then integrated. If it doesn't meet those categories, they typically won't touch it. They'll leave that to the labs. But if you want to talk about technology with us at the HQ, you'll almost certainly come to SQT. SQA, this is where I sit. SQA is the Engineering Directorate. We own, big air quotes, the entire space architecture end to end. We're the final customer. This gives us the focus on the current fielded force, as we call it, of space systems, and how it differs from the objective force, which is produced by the force design process. SQA shapes the investment strategies to get programs in place that are aimed at satisfying those differences between the fielded and the objective force, and then address any cross-cutting functions that need further integration. You might see some big ones there like cyber and commercial and partnership. Those touch every program, and therefore SQA is working those. Then SQX is our, they call themselves the Integration Directorate, but really they function as the Policy and Oversight Directorate. They track the general health and trends for all the existing programs, typically through their funding and program execution. They also manage all the special programs. And of particular note, the last block, SQX is staffed to verify and track policy, regulation, and guidance from various sources. So they make sure that we're approaching our programs as directed, and those programs are reporting up as needed. At this point, you might be asking, well, that was all very, very interesting, but why does SQ exist? I touched on this a little bit back with the puzzle pieces and how to go fast. So the issue is fairly simple. Space is a warfighter domain now, very clear. Our adversaries are expanding their space-based capabilities, especially China, at an incredible pace, like unprecedented. They have looked at the successful use of space by the US in conflict and are actively adding those capabilities to their military. They want what we have enjoyed and are well on their way to achieving or even exceeding our capabilities. And at the same time, the threat landscape in space has changed substantially. Our adversaries have put together a complete suite of capabilities to interfere or counter our space-based capabilities. And we can't afford to pretend that the worst thing that could happen to a billion-dollar satellite is now just a solar flare. We can't afford to assume that we have 20 years to roll out a new system or an improvement, and we can't assume that space-based capabilities are going to be there when we need them most, unless we achieve that speed, resiliency, and integration through our space acquisitions. I also mentioned earlier that SQA steers programs to address the difference between the fielded and the objective force. To counter the threats we face, SQA put together their top 10 need-to-haves for the next space architecture. Go through these real quick, but I can talk about more of these offline. We need significant integration of military and commercial SATCOM. It's already there, but we need more, lots more, particularly with the low Earth orbit systems. We need, this is trite, but we need more cyber, right, as soon as possible, and not cyber with a hand wave, but we're talking defensive, offensive, attribution tools, like everything you can think of. We need these yesterday. We need resiliency and smart management of our ground systems. And there's quite a bit to unpack there, but that's where you start talking about AI tools, like spectrum management tools, things that AI can use to help simplify operations and free up operators or other resources. We need to deliver the moving target indicator on orbit as soon as possible. We need to open up the user equipment community for PNT. This is a known acquisition choke point, and not just we need to buy more or buy faster, but we need to actually open up the aperture on what it means to create user equipment. The fun one is we got to make rocket cargo and responsive launch an operational reality. We have to execute our pivot to narrowband SATCOM, and we need to accelerate that, get that as soon as possible. And we need more space domain awareness, SDA, on orbit. And that's not just national, but that's international. We need our partners to help us with that one. And the final one is to enable a paradigm shift to what we call sustained space maneuver, but I've heard it called before, maneuver without regret, so that fuel on your spacecraft is not the one limiting operational factor. Those are all major architecture changes from what we have. And now the most interesting slides I have today. This one and the next one. This right here is a snapshot of the fielded force for FY25. You've got all the different orbital regimes, including the ground and cislunar up there in the corner, L1, solar. This particular version adds key systems from international civil and intelligence community partner systems at the unclassified level. It does not include all systems that the DoD might use, but it does include payloads, DoD payloads hosted on other satellites. And there are partner systems in here identified with an orange glow around them. So you see them on the right and down in LEO. This includes icons to represent major satellite ground control networks on the bottom, as well as space surveillance sensors, SATCOM gateways, electromagnetic warfare capabilities, and launch ranges. Flash forward 5 years, this is the current future force that we're aiming for, as a combination of what the force design is asking, tempered by acquisition realities. In general, satellites are shown if at least one operational satellite of a program is expected to be on orbit. These are for systems or capabilities currently programmed and planned for, but not what-if possible concepts. So no tech demos here. Let's see, new programs and partner systems are also identified with a glow. We got two glow colors there. Gold is still a partner system. Gray are new systems in the 2030 epoch. You also note here an increasing occurrence, some things that have multiple satellites stacked on each other, or they got a little subnote that says like greater than 100 SVs. These indicate constellations that are proliferated to over 100 satellites. And that is the new reality. I'll leave this up here because it's way more interesting to look at than the question slide. But that concludes my brief, and I'm happy to field any questions.
Well, good morning. Nice job.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm Tracy Hines. I'm the Deputy Director for Global Space Operations at U.S. Space Command.
All right.
So really good to see where we're going in the future and all those steps spot on. Um, and I know this is unclassified, but as you know, there are some gaps, especially in our space domain awareness. So as a combatant command who drives the requirements, how can we be more of a demanding customer? Because there's a lot of capabilities, but things keep sliding to the right, and it frustrates the warfighter. So how
Absolutely.
can I be more of a demanding customer?
It's a really good question. So I've read your most recent strategy and your top 8 or 9, I think. And several of our top 10 at SQA were informed by that. Specifically, I want to say space maneuver. Um, you're doing some of the right things to get that demand signal out there, but what we probably need more of is help with advocacy and to put pressure on essentially the S5, right? CSRO. So maybe it's something that we can work together on to try and do some more push, because ultimately we are trying to get more capability to Spacecom as soon as possible, and we're limited by essentially resources and priority rights. So everything comes back down to the headquarters and the POM process. And that's where we lose all these fights, where you see everything important, get rack and stacked, and then slid to the right. So that's a conversation we probably just need to keep having, and we'll do that fight. Yeah, but you can bring SQ into it, and maybe together we can do some bigger pushes.
Hi, Donald Kwok from Northrop Grumman. You had mentioned a pivot in narrowband. Could you expand on that? Because my understanding is that those SLE are currently.
See that last part again?
My understanding is that MUOS SLEs are in acquisition right now. Service life extension, 2 more vehicles.
Yeah, I remember that bit. This is more of an architecture change. So when we talk about staying at the unclassed level, we talk about pivoting to narrowband SATCOM. We're talking about getting that robustness and that resilience to mission that narrowband provides as opposed to broadband. So it's not we don't need broadband. We definitely still need all of our broadband. But there is a architecture decision that needs to be made and enforced to start bringing those capabilities in, because quite honestly, the threat has capabilities to interfere with general broadband in a way that narrowband can help us with. So that's something we need to move towards aggressively.
The Admiral did a great job of actually leading into this question or comment that I have on this organization. So, Admiral, Space Acquisition Council. You see those leaders there. At the end of the day, we realized a year and a half ago, they're kind of making some big decisions about the future of space. What you don't see there in that chart is the Navy represented, or the naval force. So, in fact, when Ms. Rathbun was DAS and IWAR / CTO, we are now part of the Space Acquisition Council. So ASNRDA actual sits on that council. With that being said, I think we, to your question, Admiral, can do a better job of representing some of those, I'll use the term shortfalls or lack of expectations at that council, at that meeting. So I'm just telling you, Matt, what's interesting is there should be a Navy symbol at that, in the SAC. And again, we go there every time. Normally now it'll be attended by Mr. Jim Day, who's DAS and Mission Systems, who covers down on space. So I just want to bring that to your attention, as yours as well.
So that's a good point. I did not know that.
Okay.
I haven't been to a SAC meeting yet, but without that representation, other services are going to be forced to go through the joint requirement process, which again ends at S5 essentially for us. But that process is long and difficult, whereas influence on decisions, big decisions for large programs or complete architecture changes, would ultimately be settled at that council. So you'd probably see it there first and be able to weigh in on it if it meets your needs as a service first.
Because we've been very interested as a naval, again, within the Secretariat for the Navy, is how do we influence your OODA loop with respect to what's coming up for space? And we have great relationships, obviously, with the SWAC and all those teams. But I'll be honest with you, it tends to be at the operator worker level who are doing the actual assessments and the actual analysis. So we, working with Dozen Policy, who is our space policy lead, we've kind of injected ourselves into that OODA loop with respect to the GISRIC and how you all are going to get after what's space look like next. Because again, we understand you have a lot of customers, but we're the most important customer. And I will always say it that way. But just saying. Anywho, I just want to throw that out there for you, Matt. I think we're working really well together, but we have a lot more work to do. And I appreciate the Admiral kind of leading with that comment of like, I love the fact that you guys put up that 2030 architecture. That's interesting. 2027 really interests me more of what our warfighters can be leveraging in January of 2027. Our Chief of Naval Operations has made it very clear that she wants to have more players on the field and that we're operating at a high tempo on January 2027. So somewhere in between those two epics, we have to understand what's available.
Right.
That makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Hi, this is Alice Keo from Scientific Research Corporation. I wanted to see if you could expound on how, or if you have an idea on how you can leverage the Space Development Agency's unique structure, acquisitions, accesses, oversight, in order to dovetail into your overall strategy.
Let's see if I can say this correctly. SDA already contributes to this architecture. They fall under, where are they? There's RCO. SDA should be in here somewhere. On the left, there we go. There's SDA. In the National Capital Region, direct report to the SAE. They are, more importantly, as you alluded to, under a different set of acquisition rules than all the other program offices, especially those situated at SSC. They're allowed to do things differently as part of their stand-up charter, right? And so we are, as a service, looking at SDA, one, for what they're going to deliver, because they made some big promises, and it seems like they are delivering on them. So this is looking more and more like a success story of a different way to do acquisitions. But it's also not necessarily the same requirement set as the traditional path, which we call fully burdened programs. They've got the .mil PF tail on them, right? The full end-to-end life cycle costs all worked out, disposal plan, maintenance plan, training plan, all of those things. Space RCO suffers from this too. They can, the Rapid Capabilities Office, they're there to deliver something straight to the warfighter. Boom, great. That's like a high-end or a fully operational tested out prototype with no acquisition tail. So then it goes back to SSC to be turned into a full program. And there's some chafing there on those different policies. But those two entities are there to go fast and figure out how to go fast. And they're really important to our way of doing business right now to trailblaze those methods so that we're not stuck with old ways of doing business that are having a difficult time adapting to modern times. Operational command combatant interfaces. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I believe so, but I don't know the details. I know that SDA's systems show up on one of the last two charts. Or they should. There it is. But what they're delivering now with tranche 0 and 1 and I think 2 is going to be MILNET. And MILNET's going to be a major piece of a lot of our military space architecture. So they're definitely plugged in. Now comes a greater question of, are they making another bespoke system, even though they're doing it fast? Is it fully integrated with everything we need? Is it being built in a way that other systems can integrate to it? We hope so, but they are going a lot faster than our traditional processes. So there's some struggle there. But I think we can resolve it. And they are doing what they said they're going to do with firm fixed price contracts, short delivery times. They're doing it.
Yeah, and so I've been involved with the requirements process for SDA from the Navy perspective. Um, they hold routine meetings, what are called like warfighter councils. And actually, Mr. Bill Flynn sits in for Navy because Mr. Bill Flynn leads our Space Requirements Directorate in OpNav, and he votes on the Tranche 1, Tranche 2, Tranche 3 requirements. And I got to tell you, that is a huge Excel spreadsheet of requirements that all the services want. And that's actually some of the challenges that we've seen with respect to the Navy is, again, how do you prioritize all those amazing requirements? And everyone expects SDA to deliver on those in these upcoming tranches. And oh, by the way, those tranche requirements have to, and let me know if I'm wrong, Matt, have to be locked down at least a couple years in advance, right? Normally when they're locked down like a decade in advance, they're trying to get them obviously built and fielded and continuously replaced with those updated requirements. So to answer your question, I think that's how the requirements are being set. That's new for the Navy with respect to requirements and not going through JSIDs and approved requirements documents. But we understand and we're definitely participating in the way they want to move fast. But again, OpNav sits at that voting panel, lack of a better term, and is codified moving forward. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and there's an SDA rep here today, I think, later on in the speaking pool, but maybe you can set us a little bit straight.
Got it.
They tend to address the new requirements issue within like the next tranche, right? It's like, okay, we're going to have an adjustment or an improvement, new capability. They're going to do that in the next tranche. They can keep that window and that speed. With the traditional acquisition programs, they would typically redo the JSIDS process and slip the whole program again, right? Or requirement creep, or get waivers, right? And then that's another process. So it's definitely a different way of doing business, and we're all cheering for their success, honestly.
Yeah, so adding to that, actually, we've been working a lot with commercial entities, SpaceX, ASD, Space Mobile, Zona. In fact, some of them are in the room right now, and they'll be giving talks today. In fact, you want to stay for my next brief, shameless plug. But as we work with SDA and other organizations, we do look at what commercial has to offer, and we revise the needs as we go. To the Admiral's point, we are a very demanding customer in the Navy, and we will remain so. And if commercial beats SDA to the punch, that's what it is. But SDA will always handle the bespoke needs of the DoD and as a whole, but more so the Navy, because we can't drag a fiber optic cable behind our ships. It just screws the screws. So with that, we've been working very closely with SDA, and they've been very accommodating. We've evaluated their Tranche 0 satellites. We've been influencing some of their Tranche 1, 2, and tomorrow you'll hear about some of the A2 PNT, assured and alternative PNT solutions that SDA will put forth, and we are looking to integrate that into the Navy's GPNTS system. So not a question, just a comment.
Good morning, sir. Lieutenant Commander Payne from U.S. Space Command. From an acquisitions community perspective, is there any discussion to move up resilient PNT on that sort of architecture priority list based on current threats with EMI and Russia, and then PRC is our pacing threat?
So the short answer is yes. And the nuance here is that we built our most recent top 10 architectures list shortly before or immediately after, very close to the most recent force design release that included resilient PNT architectures. So it might not reflect that yet for several more months. We want to keep this unclassified, but it has been considered heavily, and it is part of the current force design.
Hey, let's, like I said, I gave Matt all of a week to get ready for this brief, so he put it together. So let's clap him up and say thank you very much. Appreciate you doing that. Well done. That was your patch. Bill Jew's got the next brief. It's the Navy's approach to multimodal, multi-vendor capabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and let him proceed on to brief because what time's your ceremony today, Bill? Okay, Bill's going to get an award at 1100. He's getting the Copernicus Award, ladies and gentlemen. He's that important to the United States Navy and the Marine Corps and what we do. So I'm going to go ahead and let him accelerate his brief so he can actually be there to get the award. If not, Bill, I can get it for you. No? Okay, come on up, Bill, Jew. Oh, thank you.
Good. This is you.
Okay. Hey, good morning. So I'm Bill Jew from PMWA 170 out of Naval. Actually, I'm a NIWIC person that's ex-coded in there. So I've been doing SATCOM for nearly 40 years, and I'm sure that's obvious to you. And SATCOM got a little stayed in I'd say about 10 years ago. And then a little tiny company called SpaceX showed up and started launching Tintin 1 and Tintin 2. That really changed the dynamics of what space could look like. And I'm going to sort of walk you through how the Navy has utilized all these commercial services and also military variants that are bespoke, which of course I can't touch much about. But with that said, I want to sort of touch briefly on some satellite orbits and why is space so easy, it seems, and exciting today. So for the longest of time, we've had geosynchronous orbits, and roughly at about 36,000 kilometers, the satellites are trackable. It moves perfectly in sync with the Earth, and therefore you put up your fixed parabolic and you're good to go. Those parabolics were rather cheap to make, and we didn't have to have exotic tracking loops. So MEO and LEO have always been considered, but we just didn't have the technology. So how did we get to MEO? Well, it turned out the phased array antennas, the active electronically steered antennas and such became cheaper as microelectronics became more dense and we started getting into the nanometer scale and whatnot. Phased arrays just benefited the heck out of that. And as a result, we can now actively track satellites. And so companies like SES started launching satellites, and it turns out we get tremendous capacity and lower latency and other benefits associated with that. But it was the antenna, not any other thing, that allowed us to get to MEO. So what got us to LEO? Well, SpaceX, again, with the Falcon 9, gave us a bus to get up into space. And so launching satellites became easy. Now we have New Glenn, we have Atlas, we have a variety of companies that are launching for us. So getting to space has become somewhat commoditized. No more bespoke, massive launches. The satellites are smaller, and so with that, you could actually launch many dozens of satellites at the same time. So really, the progression is the ability to actively track satellites and do it as cheaply as possible and get these space vehicles up quickly. So some constellation stats to keep in mind. Back in 2018, SpaceX launched Tintin 1 and Tintin 2. That's when the Navy really started interacting with them. So just from capacity point of view, back in 1999, we were partying hard because we got a 1 megabit per second link down to an aircraft carrier. What would we do with all that capacity? We said 1 megabit per second. Back in 2018, when SpaceX was starting to launch, we got to 20 megabit per second. Wow, 20 megabit per second. Of course, the average sailor jumps on board and they have a gigabit per second to him or herself. So we needed to get a little better. With SpaceX starting to launch, we're now dropping about 2 gigabit per second to an aircraft carrier. And we're not happy about that. Ma'am, we are demanding customers, and we have a pathway in the future to get to 20, 30, possibly 100 gigabit per second down to a ship. So when we started tracking them in 2020, because that launch cadence really started, the total of all the active satellites in space were just under 5,000. This is all satellites. So by the summer of that year, SpaceX manages to launch 540 satellites, making up 10% of the constellation. Today, they're the majority of the satellites. In fact, this number 76, 77 is incorrect. That's when I submitted the brief to the PAO. Let me consult my Palm Pilot, and it says last night they launched another 23 satellites. They're at 7,821 satellites. So from the time I submitted this brief, 2 weeks, they've launched 144 satellites, and they're on this launch cadence. And this is not just them. We have AST Space Mobile, Zona, TrustPoint, OneWeb, even Amazon's in this game. So we figure that by roughly 2027, if SpaceX does manage to launch all 42,000 satellites, we'll be at about 46,000. With the other satellite constellation coming on, about 60,000. And you can go to the UNUSA database and you can track all these numbers for yourself. Anyhow, so with that, as you can see from the picture here, the bottom left is the coverage that SpaceX provides. And this is a 2-year-old diagram. The latest drawing they gave me was just a green blob. But each one of those satellites were launching 48 beams times 3 or 4. So you can see that pretty much the entire Earth is covered. This is just SpaceX alone, and other constellations will come along. The middle diagram is the optical inter-satellite links. All of these satellites are interconnected optically in space. They're achieving hundreds of gigabits per second between satellites, 4 optical heads per satellite. So tremendous capacity. To the right, Ukraine, SpaceX jumped right in. On day 1, they launched services to Ukraine, and that was not properly provisioned. For those who have done satellite access or gateway access, SAR-GARS, you know it's months of wrangling before you get any kind of capacity. SpaceX managed to do this with 3 people, by the way. They hand-jammed a service. And there are more. I think the PNT question was raised. Those companies that are showing in red font, they all have intention to offer positioning, navigation, and timing services. And we're talking about companies that are promising centimeter scale accuracies in open areas and half-meter accuracies in urban jungles. I'm sure you've driven through cities where Google was trying to take you into a garage when you should have been going down a road. So things like that will be solved in the future. So just looking at these companies, there's a whole bunch of top right, AST Space Mobile, they're building some ridiculous, these are like 2,000 plus square foot antennas. I think that's going to solve global warming if they can launch enough of them. We'll probably, and then you got on the top left, by the way, that's Bluetooth from space. I want you to think about that. Bluetooth was designed for 10 meter. That satellite, they have 3 of them up, and there are more coming. It communicates 550 kilometers, more than 300 miles away, and communicates with a Bluetooth device. I'm not talking about altered ones. Plain old Texas Instrument chips will do the trick. And there is a particular modulation coding technique that will allow you to do that. So just looking at it, there's a whole bunch of companies coming up. In fact, the Navy's working with 23 companies and growing. There are more entrants into this space. So the latest company that we're working with is Lumen Orbit. The solar panel array, I want you to realize, is 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer. You heard me right, 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer. In fact, you see the little space vehicle that's bringing a package that will have multi-exabytes of storage and many billions of GPU core living up in space. And they'll bring them up modular in that manner. And they will deorbit those, not by burning them up, but bringing actually the data back down. 5 gigawatts of power for solar. All those satellites are sun synchronous, and they'll expand the capabilities as they go. They have They'll be launching their first protosat in May. This is how quickly things are done here. So if you think about the most energy consuming device in your home, you know what that is? It's not your air conditioner, it's not your refrigerator, it's this. The back-end services requires tremendous amount of power. So this company is trying to solve some of that issue by having the storage and processing done in space. We currently have in the Navy a cloud computing system on board, and we sort of call it the mini cloud or the fog, and that serves up multi-petabytes and everything else. We now will have the ability to leverage that from space anywhere, and these things will be connected optically. So with that, we've been working very closely with the community, and as a Admiral, to your point about being a demanding customer, we've been asking these LEO, MEO, including HEO and even GEO providers to start working on some of these solutions. I'm not going to run through the whole long list of stuff, but some of the more important things that we are trying to achieve is a multi-aperture antenna system. As we put in dozens of constellation services, we don't want to have dozens and many, and actually it's not dozens. For every constellation, sometimes we need to have 2 or 3 apertures because the ship becomes a blockage point. Not so much with the LEOs and the MEOs, but so we're looking for advanced apertures. We're looking for the ability to do multi-link baseband. That means a unified terminal, and we already have one. It's called STING, SATCOM Terminal, transportable for non-geostationary orbit. In fact, that's the acronym that our captain gave us when he was our PM, and we're going to work on a more improved one. It's called B-STING, and that's bandwidth expansion and enhancements. So living legacy for the captain here. And more importantly, many of you have heard MOSA. I really don't like that term, Modular Open Systems Architecture. Sounds great. Well, the trouble is it uses standards, and the problem with standards are there are too many of them. And if you don't like those, you'll create a new standard, and we cannot get anything to talk to each other. So what the Navy's been embarking on is P3I, Pre-Planned Product Improvement. We tell industry what we want. We want VITA 65, VITA 46, we want VITA 49.2, and by speccing that, there's a pathway towards the future. We also tell you what the form factor looks like. We like to have 3U VPX, and we were told not to convey such harsh requirements on industry. There's exacting requirements, but if you sort of create the envelope, there's a lot of flexibility within that. But we want basically to have a true modular architecture that the Navy's defined, not have the industry guess, and then they bring us a rock and we tell you that's not the right rock, and you burn through all your IRAD and you're not working with us. So we want to tell you what we're looking for. So along those lines, that STING system allows us to have access to any orbit, any vendor, anytime, anywhere, and that's important to us. And we want the ability to leverage everything. This too is dated, by the way. We're aiming to put this on 211 ships. I think we're at about 80 ships now. At time of publication just 3 weeks ago was 78. So we're rapidly fielding this stuff. And how are we doing this? In a very modular sense. You can see the apertures, like the one on the right is a multi-constellation. That one antenna connects with multiple satellites. And also, how are we deploying this stuff? We go from something that's more than 13 foot in diameter with the radome on a special sponson, and we take, say, a Starlink antenna and put that on a gun mount and go from 25 megabit per second to more than 400 or 500 megabit per second. We then bond those terminals and achieve multi-gigabit per second. With that, the unified architecture, this is 3U VPX. Navy really desires it. And actually, the Army's the lead in this. They have CMOS, MORA, SOSA. And so we've jumped onto the bandwagon. So with that, we want the VITA 65 profiles, 67 for the lower portion, And we spec all this, so if you work with us, we'll tell you the envelope. We don't actually tell you what the bit depths are and the response frequencies, dynamic range. We don't do any of that. But at least constructively, it's modular, truly modular, and we've called out the standards in advance. To that end, the Army is also doing something similar. It's called MOM, Multi-Orbit Modem System. And I hope there aren't any Army people here, but going to battle with MOM just doesn't seem right. Sting is a little better. So they basically borrowed our same general schema, and with that, they are able to also create an envelope of standards from which industry can respond. So recently, L3Harris won this contract. For us, actually, we have a small business called Bascom Hunter Technologies out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And Louisiana is really known for oil and gas, and we have now a small tech company with LSU involved. So making really good progress in that regard. And then when you tie it all together, we want to have what's called a hybrid space architecture. And some of what we want to achieve here is the ability, as I said, any orbit, anytime, anywhere, and so forth, so on. We envision a future where these disparate satellite systems will talk to each other. So I sound like a broken record, I'll say it again. OpenZR+, put that on your vernacular. That's an optical standard that was designed for inter-building communications. SpaceX managed to make it work in space. Amazon's follow suit. Rivada, lots of companies are starting to have a common PHY and link layer. Oh my God, there could be a time where you go up on Starlink, hit Amazon Kuiper, hit a Rivada network, and come down to the Google Cloud. Pretty exciting times. So that hyperspace architecture, I'm going to show you a little video from DIU.
Throughout history, militaries have strived to reduce the time between when a request for information is made and when the end user receives the requested information. This delay is called information latency. If a warfighter does not receive information in a timely manner, the data may not provide much value. We now live in a high-speed information age thanks to these advances and our ability to access the entire globe through satellite networks. Our military has dramatically decreased information latency to levels previous generations could only imagine. Even though space provides us the ultimate high ground, it still has limitations. Due to spacecraft orbits, forces currently may have to wait hours until the next available satellite is in the needed position over Earth. Even after a satellite completes its collect, it still may take hours or longer for that information to be downlinked, processed, analyzed, and finally received. In response to these challenges, we are dedicated to reducing information latency to the warfighter by researching and analyzing the benefits of a more interoperable and expanded space architecture, referred to as the hybrid space architecture, where traditional military space assets are augmented by and connected with previously untapped space resources. To start with, simply having more satellite systems in an architecture cuts the average time for a taskable satellite to be in the needed position over Earth. Next, with a more diverse architecture, less traditional satellites can accomplish a large portion of the task, freeing the more capable traditional military and intelligence community satellites to perform the most demanding missions. And by interconnecting these previously disparate systems, we can further reduce the time it takes to get information to the end user by having the system automatically route the data through the best communication path in the shortest amount of time. This routing concept is known as path-agnostic communications, which is the communication concept implemented on the internet, where data is constantly rerouting based on congestion and link availability. An analogous hybrid architecture that has combined untapped resources is demonstrated in the rideshare industry. They did not develop or produce additional vehicles, but instead created a platform that linked millions of drivers with passengers by interconnecting networks and developing the necessary software. They understood that drivers' capabilities and passengers' requirements vary widely. The diversity of resources is actually their strength. Their hybrid mix of available resources helps to meet the diverse and constantly changing span of customer needs. And despite the complexity of the underlying system, the interface is designed to be easy to use. Similarly, imagine a future space architecture for our military that includes a dramatically increased number of taskable satellites with a hybrid mix of capabilities and availability. And with all of these in communication with one another in a path-agnostic communications framework where someone in the field could interact with a simple interface to convey the most important requirements at that time to meet the information needs. Using this hybrid mix of available resources enables the system to best meet the unique requirements of every user, giving the warfighters a better chance to accomplish the mission and come home safely.
So that's the vision that we have for the Navy, at least, and it aligns very well with Defense Innovation Unit. And other services and such are starting to jump onto that bandwagon. So, man, once again, we're demanding customers, and we're asking other services and agencies to do so. And with that, the industry's been responding. The most impressive part is that we don't have to cut checks on a regular basis. They realize that there is light at the end of the tunnel if they work with us to develop capabilities that we are willing to buy versus that DoD 5000 process, which we will use, that makes sense, but we're preparing for that future when we can leverage all these commercial services. So not going to go there, but the most interesting thing about what industry is doing is they're going to also handle the cislunar situation. I hope I have new triplet grandkids, and I hope they'll go to the moon someday. And this is becoming more of a reality as we start building networks, not just here on good old Earth, but we're starting to look at the solar system as a whole. So how do we get there? And that requires contracting. We don't buy anything without a contract. I would love to just slip SpaceX some few bucks or AST and get things done, but I'll probably wear handcuffs, and that's not a good day. So with that, you may have heard of Cisco, and that's not the router company, Commercial Satellite Communications Office. They now, I think, have a total of over $2 billion to have IDIQ contracts, and we're working closely with industry partners, and not just the constellation builders, ground infrastructure and such. In fact, even companies like Google are starting to show up in the space business by taking care of the ground business. CSSC2 is our program office's contract vehicle. It's a commercial satellite services contract. And so we acquire things through Inmarsat, a traditional GEO provider, and that's how we are quickly outfitting our ships and such. So the exciting news for Google is that they are offering what's called Ground Gateway as a Service. So today, if you look at all the fiber, undersea fiber capacity today, there are about 515 cables with nearly 600 petabits per second of capacity. Google's been on a tear building their own network, and now they're going to mesh that together. They're aiming to get to exabits per second. So yeah, I mean, we're just getting used to going from megabit to gigabit, and now we skip peta and we're going to exa. What's next? Exabits of capacity, and they have triple redundant fiber capabilities that they're building, and that's called Ground Gateway as a Service. They're going to put out apertures all over the world, and with that, we expect to see many, many more constellation builders showing up. In fact, one of the companies that we'll be briefing today is Link. They're out of Falls Church, it's in a nondescript office park, and they're building satellites on their third floor facility. So if you want to get into the satellite business, SpaceX will launch your stuff, and Google will provide you ground gateway service. The options that we have today is phenomenal. So space is exciting once again. With that, I'll take any questions. By the way, the hyperspace architecture video is on YouTube. Take a look at it.
So I believe the Navy's doing a great job of leading the way. I know when we first started off with Sting, we were looking for the other services to have provided some type of multimodal, multi-orbit capability. We're just going to steal it and slap a Navy sticker on it because we don't care who designs it. We just want the capability. That being said, Navy's been leading. That's a great slide to put up, Bill, because that goes to my question. And maybe, Admiral, you can help me with this, not to put you on the spot. We're going to have so many opportunities and options. We're going to be limited by service contracts is what I believe it's going to be. So maybe for the group, what's the recommendation moving forward? How do we figure out how we're going to buy these services, whether it's through Cisco or CSC2, I view that as really the biggest choke point when it comes to who owns that bill, lack of a better term, bill, who owns that cost, and is that going to be space forces to distribute, or is the services going to take care of themselves? Is it going to be a combination of those two? Any thoughts on that? From RDA's perspective, I'm a bit concerned.
Well, I would love to spend other people's monies, but unfortunately, that's not really happening. So with the limited funds that we've had, we sort of set in motion the contracting and the ability to field things. So we're just simply proving the point. In fact, I think a lot of what we're doing here is beta testing. These services are not perfect, and we're showing that well, enemy of good is great, and good is actually pretty dang good for us, as long as we have multiple sources. So the battle for who pays for this stuff, well, that's going to happen eventually, but we know the goods are very good to consume, and so it's sort of like we grazed at Costco, and yeah, the stuff is good now. We got to pony up the dollars to buy the 1,000 pack of underwears or whatever it might be. Yes, ma'am.
Yep. There. Yep. Yep.
Absolutely, man. In fact, we have SpaceX back there, Chris and Alex. We have a small company, Bascom Hunter. We have AST Space Mobile. Soon we'll have Link and others. The fact that they are leaning forward, ma'am, is radically different. Normally, yes, ma'am. And actually, we're also tracking all of them. You see, G60 Starlink, we're a little worried about that because what is their payload? Um, so anyhow, we're seeing tremendous amount of activity in space, and the days of just whatever is on the ground is what we got is going away. And so Captain, to your point, we have proven that the goods are ready for consumption. Now, who pays?
Well, my analogy, Admiral, is simple. We don't argue about the price of fuel when we're driving ships across the globe. Bandwidth has got to be viewed as fuel, right? And we've got to get to the point where we're not who's going to pay for it, but leadership understands this is probably the most viable part of the kill web in order to beat our enemy. Because we used to operate with the concept of there's not going to be space. But guess what? I think we've kind of turned that corner, and we realize there's so much diversity, so much resiliency and redundancy out there that will be some parts of space, on our worst day. And we've got to get there and have that figured out before we actually have to use it in a real scenario. And that does concern me. So we need to figure that out from leadership perspective.
Right, so we have 9 working WGS satellites, and we're trying to put up 2 more. And companies like SpaceX and AST and others are putting up thousands. I'd hate to be the adversary who have to go after all of this stuff. It's quite a few assets to go after. So we run another shameless plug. I run a working group which was inspired by Captain Givens called SLAM Time, SATCOM, LEO, and MEO, Technical Information Meetings and Exchange. That looks a lot like Industry Day, and our attorneys have been trying to shut us down, but we have Naval Postgraduate School on board, and it's an educational event. We run the event with 250 attendees at the TS-SCI SITK level. We try to clear small businesses and large alike so that we can really show them what the problem is. Because you can scratch the surface, and once again, industry will guess as to what is the problem. So we're doing our best to bring people in, get them cleared, understand what we have to live with. And by the way, all the while, we also worry about the quality of life for the sailors and such. We've had situations where folks were able to be in the room, telemedicine basically, as their spouses were giving birth and such. We've had the avoidance of having to bring a ship in because someone had a surgery that we solved through telemedicine and such. And we also looked at some stats that Mr. Stevenson, formerly at Compact Fleet, asked us to look at. During COVID years, because the ships weren't coming in, the suicide rates went up on ships. We then fielded O3B at Giant Satellite Terminal, then Starlink and others. Suicide rates dropped to pre-COVID periods. So, because today's generation, they live off of this. This is their, I mean, I carry 2 laptops. They look at me funny as if I have 2 heads or something. They can do everything on their phone, and to be connected and serve your country at the same time, pretty impressive. Okay. Thank you.
The strategy that's been leveraged by the program office and Naval to work closely with industry and explain the challenges, and I just got to commend this industry. This industry has been open to discussion. It is not your normal legacy. We will not have a conversation without a lawyer and a contract representative president. That has really allowed us to accelerate and move forward. And I hope, and I use the term hope, that strategy continues into the future, because everything we are seeing is nothing but great teaming. And at the end of the day, we know that we don't want to DOD the crap out of what you do. We want to leverage what you do while you're trying to pursue making profit. We can leverage that as a dual use capability, and that's why I think we're winning right now. That being said, we accelerated the briefs today because, again, Mr. Jew is gonna walk off here soon and get an award. So Bill, we're back here at 1300 after lunch, give or take. All right, we got some great briefs. We're gonna get the word out. We got some great briefs from our industry partners coming up. Thanks everybody online, and one more time, clap it up for Bill and his Copernicus Award. All right, we'll see you guys all after lunch. Thank you very much.